Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum friends. Again, I am back, and today we are telling uh, Sebra Berbeda Sih Bahasa Indonesia than Malayu. So, difference between the Indonesia and Malayu. So, before starting the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and let's start the video.
The Lang Focus channel, and my name is
Hey,
Paul.
hello.
Today we're going to examine the differences between
Okay.
two sister languages, Indonesian, also known as Bahasa
Oh, sister
Indonesia,
languages,
and
okay.
Malay, also known as Bahasa Malayu.
Selamat datang di Indonesia.
Okay.
Welcome in Indonesia.
Selamat datang ke Malaysia.
Welcome to Malaysia. As you can see, at first glance,
Okay.
the two languages seem essentially the same,
The
and their
NK,
standard
only
varieties are in
just,
large
okay.
part mutually intelligible. But you can also see that they're not exactly the same. If you've seen my individual videos on Indonesian and Malay, then you know how this came about. But to briefly recap, before the present-day countries of Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, and Singapore existed, Malay was spoken throughout the area and had been a lingua franca for centuries. But in 1928, the Indonesian nationalist movement that wanted to gain independence from the Dutch chose Malay as the national language of their future country and renamed it to Indonesian, or Bahasa Indonesia, while Malaysia, Brunei, and Singapore retained the name Malay. While the standard form of Indonesian and the standard form of Malay are both based on the same Johor Riau Malay, they have incorporated different influences, and since 1928 they have moved in different directions to a certain extent. It seems to me that because it was renamed Bahasa Indonesia, the Indonesian variety was set apart from the standard Malay used in other countries and given a new identity, which allowed it to diverge more freely. Today, while standard Indonesian and standard Malay are still nearly identical in terms of grammar, there are significant differences in vocabulary. I've seen casual estimates that in terms of vocabulary, they are 90% the same and 10% different, and that seems reasonable to me. There are also some differences in pronunciation and spelling. Malay used to only be written in a modified Arabic script called Jawi, but it began to be written with Roman characters during the colonial period. Originally, the system of Romanizing Malay in Malaysia, Brunei, and Singapore was influenced by English, since they were formerly under British control, while in Indonesia it was influenced by Dutch, since Indonesia was formerly under Dutch control. For example, the word for grandchild,
Cucu.
was spelled like this in Malaysia and like this in Indonesia. But in 1972, there was a spelling reform that eliminated most differences like that. But different influences of English on Malay and Dutch on Indonesian remain, mainly in the presence of loanwords. Sometimes a Dutch loanword is used in Indonesian when an older Malay word is used in Malay. For example, the word for office. In Indonesian, it's
Kantor.
in Malay, it's
Pejabat.
in Indonesian, pejabat means an official rather than an office. The word for room in Indonesian,
Kamar.
in Malay, it's
Bilik.
bilik is still used in Indonesian but means a small room like a booth or compartment. Related to that is the word for toilet or restroom. In Indonesian, the most common word is probably
Kamar kecil.
which literally means small room. In Malay, the most common words are
Tandas.
and,
Bilik air.
which is sort of a loan translation of
Tandas.
water closet or WC. Sometimes an English loanword is used in Malay, while an older Malay word is used in Indonesian. The word for hospital, in Indonesian it's
Rumah sakit.
which literally means sick house. And while both of the words are Malay, this phrase is a
जैसे
loan
कि मुझे
translation
कमेंट्स
of
में काफी
Dutch,
लोगों ने बताया हुआ
ziekenhuis.
है
In
मलय
Malay,
लोग
they simply
इंग्लिश
say
मिक्स कर
hospital.
दिए हैं उन लोगों ने
Rumah
अपनी लैंग्वेज
sakit
में एंड
used to
जैसा
be
कि
used
इसमें
in
बताया
Malay,
जा
but is
रहा है
hardly
ब्रिटिश
used anymore,
कंट्रोल्ड है मलय
except
ओके
maybe in some regional dialects. Oftentimes,
एंड
a
जो
Dutch loanword is used in
इंडोनेशियन है
Indonesian,
वो
while an
डच
English
कंट्रोल्ड है
loanword is used in
ओके
Malay. These words are often cognates, but have different spelling and pronunciation. For example, the word for television. In Indonesian, it's
Televisi.
while in Malay, it's
Television.
the word for police. In Indonesian, it's
Polisi.
while in Malay, it's
Polis.
in Indonesian
Polis.
means policy, as in an insurance policy. The word for university.
Universitas.
University.
But sometimes they're not cognates. The word for
Universitas
bag.
ओके
In Indonesian,
Tas.
which comes from Dutch. And in Malay,
Bag.
the word for petrol or gasoline.
Bensin.
Petrol.
The word for pharmacy, meaning the place where medicines are sold.
same words are
Apotek.
using in Malay
Farmasi.
In Indonesian, the word
Farmasi.
is used to refer to
I
the
think just
pharmaceutical profession and
letters का
industry, but
different
not to
है, बाकी
shops.
pronunciation I
There were
think
some
is
different
same. I'm
colonial
not think
influences
I'm
as
sure.
well.
Yeah,
For
it's
example,
same.
the word for towel. In Indonesian,
Handuk.
from Dutch, handdoek. In Malay, it's
Tuala.
which comes from the Portuguese word.
Toalha.
There are numerous words from Portuguese in both Malay and Indonesian, because Malacca, in present-day Malaysia, was a Portuguese colony for over 100 years. Another example is the word
Sepatu.
Okay.
meaning shoe, which comes from Portuguese.
Sapato.
Sapatu is the usual word for shoe in Indonesian, but in
Portuguese
Malay it's not
colonies,
used much
okay?
anymore, and the word
For over
Kasut
100
is
years.
used instead, especially by young people. Putting aside colonial vocabulary in particular and looking at vocabulary in general, it's fair to say that the words that are different in Indonesian and Malay are often very basic and common words. The word for tree,
Pohon.
Yeah.
Pokok.
the word for car.
Mobil.
This is another word from Dutch and is short for automobil. In Malay, it's
Kereta.
in Indonesian
Kereta.
means train and is short for,
Kereta api.
and that's the same as
Yeah,
the Malay word for
a
train.
train. I know
Kereta
this
api.
word.
Kereta api literally means fire wagon, with wagon being the original
Kereta
sense of
api.
kereta before it meant car. Notice the Malay pronunciation of kereta.
Kereta.
Final a is usually pronounced as a schwa in Malay, at least in Malaysia. A couple more examples. Saya, meaning I, is pronounced,
Saya.
and pertama,
Yeah, saya
meaning
means
first,
I.
is pronounced.
Pertama.
City.
Kota.
Bandar.
In Malay, the word kota is also used with the meaning of city, but it's used more like that in writing, and the word's often used with the sense of a fort. In Indonesian, bandar is usually a
Okay.
port or a water channel rather than a city. Notice that the final
Oh,
R
what
is silent in
port,
many
okay.
Malay accents, including the mainstream Johor, Riau, Selangor Malay. This is also the case in some Indonesian accents, but
And
more
in
so
they
among
also
Malay
use
accents.
bandargas like a port.
Bicycle,
Sepeda.
from velociped, the popular name of early bicycle-like vehicles during the colonial period. In Malay, it's,
Basikal.
and related to those words are the words for motorcycle.
Sepeda motor.
Motosikal.
Some terms of address and family vocabulary are different. In Indonesian,
Bapak.
or
Pak.
are used to respectfully address a man, like sir. In Malay, it's
Tuan.
tuan is also used in Indonesian, but it's very
Fine,
formal.
Okay.
Similarly, in Indonesian,
Ibu.
or
Bu.
are used to mean ma'am. In Malay, the word is.
Puan.
This word does exist in Indonesian,
Puan.
but is a formal literary word and is not commonly used.
Okay.
Bapak literally means father, and ibu literally means mother, and with those meanings, they are used in Malay. In Indonesian, grandfather is,
Kakek.
while in Malay, it's usually,
Datuk.
in Malay,
Kakak.
means older sister, but in Indonesian,
Kakak.
means older sibling. Older brother is,
Kakak laki-laki.
and older sister is.
Kakak perempuan.
Not only nouns, but some verbs are different. The verb meaning can or be able to. In Indonesian, it's.
Bisa.
In Malay, it's.
Boleh.
Boleh is used in Indonesian with the meaning of may, as in you have permission to do something. But in Malay, boleh is used with both meanings. Bisa comes from Javanese, the most widely spoken native language in Indonesia. A significant number
Okay,
of Javanese
Javanese.
words have entered Indonesian, but not Malay. I should note that there's a different word, bisa, in both Malay and Indonesian that means poison or venom. The verb meaning to return.
Kembali.
Balik.
Kembali is also used, but more in writing. In many cases, both words exist as synonyms in either language, but there's a difference in frequency of word choice. Take a look at this sentence here. This means I want to
Okay.
eat something. In Indonesian, it's.
Saya mau makan sesuatu.
In Malay, it's.
Saya nak makan sesuatu.
The verb meaning to want is different. In Indonesian, mau is probably the most
Indonesian
common
and
word.
Malay,
In Malay,
I think
Hendak.
is more
more
common.
similar,
And in
right?
casual speech, it's often abbreviated to.
Nak.
Hendak is also used in Indonesian, but less often. And mau is also used in Malay, but less frequently. Another sentence. This means I always wake up after 9 o'clock. In Indonesian,
Saya selalu bangun setelah jam 9.
in Malay,
Saya sentiasa bangun selepas jam 9.
word for word, both sentences are I always wake up after hour 9. In Malay,
Sentiasa.
is often used for always, though selalu is also common in casual speech. In Indonesian,
Selalu.
is the most common word. Sentiasa is rare, but its longer form, senantiasa, is used in more formal situations. And the most common word for after in this context in Indonesian is,
Setelah.
and in Malay,
Selepas.
some words here and there are spelled a little differently. One of the words meaning to want in Indonesian is mau, as we saw before. In Malay, it's mahu, mau. The word for different in Indonesian is,
Beda.
Okay.
while in Malay, it's,
Beda.
Beza.
the word for try in
Beza.
Indonesian is,
Coba.
Okay.
while in Malay, it's,
Cuba.
the word for healthy is
Sehat.
in
Kuba.
Indonesian, while it's
Sihat.
in Malay.
Sehat.
So far,
Okay.
I've mainly been
Sehat.
focusing
Sehat
on
पे
standard
also
Indonesian
in
and
called
standard
Hindi
Malay,
sehat, yeah.
which are in large part the same, except for some differences in vocabulary and vocabulary usage. But in casual speech, the differences can be much greater. There are numerous regional and local
Many
dialects
words
of
are similar
Malay,
in
and
Hindi,
even though
yes, like
Indonesian is learned
sehat
as a second
and
language by most
bandar
Indonesians, it has developed various
and
local varieties
और भी words
influenced
हैं
by
जो मैं
regional
भूल रही
languages
हूँ
of
बहुत सारे
Indonesia.
ऐसे हैं जो
Me
हिंदी
and
से
her
भी
went to
मिलते
the shop
जुलते
to buy
हैं
some food, then we ate together. First, let's compare the standard sentences. In standard Indonesian,
Aku dan dia pergi ke toko untuk membeli makanan. Kemudian kami makan bersama.
and now in standard Malay.
Aku dan dia pergi ke kedai untuk membeli makanan. Kemudian kami makan bersama.
Word for word, both sentences are, I and she go to store for buy food, then we eat together. So you can see that these sentences are almost identical.
Okay.
There's just one main difference. The most common words for store or shop are different in Malay and Indonesian. In Indonesian, it's toko, while in Malay, it's kedai. In Indonesian, kedai is sometimes used, but for a small, simple shop like a food stand or kiosk. In Malay, kedai is used more generally for most shops. But let's take a look at how this might be said in casual speech. First, in the casual Indonesian of Jakarta.
Gue sama dia jalan ke toko buat beli makanan. Terus kita makan bareng.
The first word, gue, is a pronoun originally from Hokkien Chinese that entered casual Jakartan speech through Batawi, which is spoken by the original Batawi inhabitants of Jakarta. The next word, ama, is a shortened version of sama, which means same or together. But here it means and.
Okay.
Jalan means walk rather than go. This is simply a matter of word choice. The word buat is used instead of untuk, which means for, or for the purpose of. In standard Indonesian and Malay, buat means do or make. But in the casual speech of Jakarta, it also means for, or for the purpose of. Next, the verb beli, meaning to buy, is used in its root form with no affixes. Next, the word terus is used to mean then. This is a standard word, but is used more in colloquial speech, while in more standard speech, kemudian might be used. Next, we see the pronoun kita. In the standard sentence, the pronoun kami is used, which means we, excluding the listener. There is also the pronoun kita, which means we, including the listener. In casual Jakarta speech, the distinction between kami and kita is usually ignored and kita is used, unless there's a reason to emphasize that the listener is excluded, in which case kami can be used.
Okay.
Bareng means with or together with, and this word comes from Javanese. Now let's look at a similar sentence, but in the dialect of Johor Riau Selangor, where Kuala Lumpur is located.
Aku ngan dia pergi kedai nak beli makanan sikit. Lepas tu kita orang makan sama-sama.
Ngan is a short form of dengan, which means with, but here it means and. Dia would be dia in standard speech. Gi is a short form of the verb
Okay.
pergi, which means go. Next we see nak, which means want,
Ooh.
but here it's used to mean with the intention of. Next, again we see beli with no affixes. And here, skit is a shortened form of sedikit, which means a little. But here it doesn't really mean a little in terms of amount. It's just used to have a softening effect on the sentence. Pastu means then and is a shortened form of selepas itu, meaning after that. Kitorang comes from kita plus orang. In the casual Malay of Kuala Lumpur and its surrounding regions, kitorang is the casual pronoun meaning kami, which means we, excluding the listener. Sama-sama equals sama-sama or
Okay.
sama, but without the prefix ber. Again, notice the final schwa vowel on dia and sama-sama. One more sentence. I invited him to play football with us. First, the standard sentences. In standard Indonesian
Saya mengundangnya untuk bermain sepak bola dengan kami.
and in standard Malay.
Saya menjemputnya untuk bermain bola sepak dengan kami.
Word for word, it's I invite him for play football with us. In their standard forms, these sentences are quite similar, but we can see a couple of differences. In Indonesian, a common verb meaning invite is mengundang,
yes.
while in Malay it's menjemput. In Indonesian, menjemput means to pick up,
Menjemput,
like to pick
okay.
someone up at the airport.
There's a
Second is the term for football.
fine difference.
In Indonesian, it's sepak bola, which literally means kick ball. And in Malay, it's bola sepak, which literally means ball kick. Now let's check out the casual forms of this sentence.
Gue ngundang dia buat main bola sama kita.
Notice here that the word mengundang is shortened to ngundang. In casual speech, the suffix meng is often shortened to ng. Here again we see buat in place of the standard word untuk, meaning for or to. Notice that the verb main appears in its root form without the prefix that it has in standard speech. Next, sepak
And
bola
I think
is simply
इस वीडियो
bola.
के स्टार्टिंग में भी
Ama
कुछ
comes from
ऐसा ही
sama,
बताया
as
गया
we saw
है
before. And again,
स्टार्टिंग जब हुई थी वो
kita,
मलय
rather
से
than
हुई थी
kami.
एंड देन उसके बाद
Aku ajak dia nak
इंडोनेशिया
main bola dengan
इंडिपेंडेंट
kita
हो
orang.
गया एंड
Notice
लैंग्वेज
there's a
को
different
लेकर
verb,
भी
ajak,
ओके
meaning to invite, which is also used in Indonesian. Menjemput is more formal than ajak. Ajak is used in its root form. Note that nak seems to be used in place of untuk, just like buat in Indonesian. And just like in casual Indonesian, we see main in its root form with no prefix. Again we see ngan, the shortened form of dengan, and again we see kitorang instead of the standard word kami. As you can see, Malay and Indonesian are very similar languages, especially in their standard forms, which are used in formal and polite situations. They're arguably two standard varieties of the same language, Malay, rather than two separate languages. They only really become undeniably different when we look at their casual forms, which differ from region to region. But it's worth pointing out that these casual forms don't only differ between countries, they differ within each country as well. So that begs the question, is there really a distinction between casual Malay and casual Indonesian? Or is there simply a distinction between all of the different regional dialects, regardless of whether they're Malay or Indonesian? It seems to me that speakers of both Malay and Indonesian learn to understand other casual varieties through exposure, and through exposure to casual varieties of the other language, they would probably learn to understand them as well as casual varieties of their own language. So I think it makes sense to consider Malay and Indonesian a single pluricentric language with basically two standard varieties and a variety of different dialects. But it's just my humble opinion. What do you think? The question of the day. For speakers of either language, Malay or Indonesian,
Nice opinion.
do you consider standard Malay and standard Indonesian
अकॉर्डिंग टू हिम आई थिंक मतलब लाइक एक ही जो बोलते हैं लेट्स एक ही ट्री के दो ब्रांच समझ लीजिए राइट तो एक है
be varieties of the
इंडोनेशिया एंड
same
एक है
language?
मलय
How about their casual forms? And for other people, what's your impression of Malay and Indonesian? Do they seem like different languages to you? If you enjoyed this video, check out the different Lang-focused social media accounts like Facebook,
Yes,
YouTube,
I enjoyed
Twitter,
and
and
it is
Instagram.
informative and
as always,
educational
I'd like
video.
to say a special
Yeah.
thanks to all of my Patreon supporters for their generous monthly pledges, especially
I'll
these
paste
wonderful
his link
people
in my
right here on the
description
screen,
box so you
my
can go to
top-tier
his channel
Patreon supporters.
easily.
Many special thanks to them. And to everyone, thank you for watching and
Thanks
have
to
a
Teach.
nice day.
Oh, have a nice day too. तो वीडियो काफ़ी अच्छा था एंड तो यस फ्रेंड्स वीडियो काफ़ी हद तक मुझे अच्छा लगा, काफ़ी इन्फॉर्मेटिव था, बहुत कुछ जानने को मिला एंड कितनी सिमिलरिटीज़ हैं ये भी देखने को मिली है एंसेस्ट्रल लैंग्वेज या पेरेंट लैंग्वेज बोल सकते हैं। लाइक मैं फिर यहीं पे आऊँगी इन द एंड यही कहना चाहूँगी, एक ट्री के दो ब्रांच हैं, ये मलय एंड इंडोनेशिया राइट। सो मे भी हो सकता है मैं ठीक हूँ या हो सकता है मैं गलत हूँ, बट मुझे जहाँ तक मुझे ऐसा लगा सो अच्छा वीडियो था। होपफुली आपको भी अच्छा लगा, सब्सक्राइब कीजिएगा ना। इंशाल्लाह वी विल मीट इन नेक्स्ट वीडियो। टिल देन अल्लाह हाफिज़, बाय बाय, टेक केयर एंड थैंक्स फॉर वाचिंग।